Do you ever want to have a son? I do. And if you could talk to him now, what would you say? Would you tell him that he can do things you never thought to do, that he could be things that you weren't strong enough to, that anybody can be anything they decide you? And what if he asks you what it feels like, you know? What living feels like? Would you tell him everything's going to be okay? Would you tell him that everything is okay, that those moments in life when everything is going just right, that's when you feel the most alive? Or that when your grandmother died, or the first time you felt you weren't enough for somebody, or the first time you felt you weren't enough to comfort somebody, the first time you realized some things can't be fixed, that those times when cold stones slid down your throat and melted in your stomach, those times taught you what it really means to live. Would you tell him that you feel complex and beautiful like a jigsaw puzzle? Or would you tell him that you feel like a puzzle with too many missing pieces to stay together? Or that some days you're just a piece and you don't fit anywhere? Would you tell him how you're like a spring lake, just melting and freezing and then starting each new year clean? Or how you're like a spring lake because the ice on your surface isn't always safe for anybody to stand on? Or how you're like a spring lake because the moments you feel the weakest is when that ice is thin enough to see through? Would you tell him how you love the way snow makes everything clean, but you pray for spring and mud to finally come anyway because something about clean things terrifies you? Would you tell him that you pray sometimes, but usually just to ask for things? And would you tell him about those times you don't even know who you're praying to? Would you tell him that you're too afraid to look to see if you're broken inside? Or would you tell him that you're too brave to let anybody else look for you? Would you tell him that you know some things need to be guarded forever, or that you don't know why your hands are the coldest when you're reaching for what you want most to touch, or why they're the clumsiest when you're holding the things that you hold the most precious, or why sometimes holding things only makes fists, or why sometimes you break the things that you're trying to hold the tightest? Would you tell him that the only things that really matter to you are the people you love? Or maybe you're afraid because you've already lost more friends than you've meant to, and you're blind to the things that they want you to see, and now even your family is stretched thin enough that you only see each other on holidays. Would you tell him that you wake up some days hungry for things that don't have names? Would you tell him that the people you love hold you down, but only because that's the only way they have left to hold you? Would you tell him that you see a lot of yourself in him? And would you tell him that that scares you? Would you tell him that you do things without knowing the reasons why? And you don't even have reasons for the things that you don't do. And sometimes you're somebody you're not trying to be, and sometimes you try to be somebody you're not. And sometimes you are somebody you're not. Would you tell him, son, you could be anything you make yourself become? Or would you tell him, son, you could be anything you let yourself become? Would you tell him, like my father told me, son, you are strong enough to be whoever you decide to? Or are you scared like me that he might ask you when you're done, if that's true, why did you choose this one?